Welcome to Adobe Illustrator. For the following demonstrations, we will be using Adobe Illustrator CS6. This particular demo is getting to know the workspace. It's your first introduction to the Illustrator workspace. I will talk about your main drop-down menus, the control bar, otherwise known as the tool options bar, your toolbar. We'll discuss the artboard, floating panels, and set a couple of basic preferences. So let's get started. When you first open Adobe Illustrator, especially if you have a Macintosh, this particular project or this image window would not be open. It's open simply because I have started it and typed this wonderful outline for what we're going to follow at this time. But when you first get started, you want to see some of these familiar items. Now I'm using the Essentials workspace for this demonstration. You cannot see it probably on your screen because it's kind of off screen here, but on the far top right in this area there is a drop down menu where you can select Essentials, and it might look a little more familiar or similar to what I've got going on right now. Your main menu is across the top. Now these menus are drop-down menus that are important for accessing a number of options within Adobe Illustrator. For example, one of my favorites for beginning students to show you is this window drop-down menu. Here is where you can access your toolbar and a number of floating panels, which we'll get to in just a moment. That's under the window drop-down menu. Under Illustrator drop-down menu, you can also access preferences, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So there's all types of things that you can access. Some type preferences, things to do to an object that you might have selected on the artboard. And it's a good time right now to point out that this artboard is this white space here within your image window. So if I had started a new project, I would be working with this workspace and an image window, which we refer to everything that's between your toolbars and floating panels. The artboard is the white zone. Now if I zoom out, I can actually see a little bit more. I can zoom out here using this menu on the bottom left of my window, and you can actually see that this artboard is located within this sea of gray. Now, the artboard also shows a little red outline around the outside, which is what we'll refer to and you will learn about in a later demonstration is the bleed area. But for now, just know that your artboard is the white space. It is whatever you intend to print or export from this working illustration. Now we can zoom back in. I'm using a zoom tool, which I've accessed now from my toolbar. The toolbar is typically located on the left side once you've launched the Essentials workspace. Of course, this is open to change. If I click and hold on the toolbar and this little jaggy line across the top, you can see that I can drag that toolbar around. But if I click and hold, I can sort of anchor it to this left side. I can almost feels like a magnet has sort of pulled it into this area. I can also expand and contract that toolbar from a 2-column setup to a 1-column setup. But in order to show you the majority in this demonstration of the tools available, I'm going to use this 2-column setup. We'll go into the tools in detail in later module demonstrations. This zone here, kind of in the middle under the AI, is known as your tool options bar or the control panel. The control panel is context specific. And let me show you what I mean by that. It's related to the tool that you have selected and the object that you've selected on the artboard. So let's say, for example, I want to draw a rectangle in this zone. So if I click and drag and make my rectangle, it is context specific now to this path that I have just drawn. And I can tell that it's selected because it has this little blue outline. If I use the selection tool and select something else on the artboard, it gets the blue outline again. And again, it's showing in the control panel that a different item, in this case type, has been selected. If I click on our rectangle, you'll see that a path or shape has been selected on the artboard. And I have all kinds of little options available to me with related to this context-specific control panel. And I can do different things to this item using that control panel. Now, at this point, we're not going to go into detail what all of these things do, but it's important to know where that control panel is and that it's related to the tool that you just used or the selected item on the artboard. Which brings us to yet another part of the workspace, over here, the floating panels. Now, you know that I zoomed in and out by using this menu on the bottom left of your window. I can also zoom in and out using this zoom tool. And just for example, the zoom tool is also related to this navigator panel. Navigator panel icon looks like this steering wheel for a ship or navigation of a ship. And if I click on the icon, it brings up a floating panel. That's one way to access the floating panel. I can close that floating panel, and I can access it also under Window drop-down menu and scroll down and find Navigator. So knowing which toolbar you want to access or which floating panel you want to access, if I select it under Window drop-down menu, it brings it up. Notice how Tools is checked. That's related to your toolbar on the left side. So I can bring that Navigator panel back up. Another interesting thing about these floating panels is that they can be moved around. They can be grouped with other items. I can also expand and contract them by clicking the forward two arrows on the top right of the panel or the back two arrows to contract, expand, or contract. The other interesting thing to look at within these panels is there's a little hatched line area. By clicking on that, I can move this panel as an icon, or as an expanded panel, I click on the title of that panel to move it around my workspace. Now, the workspace can begin to get very cluttered as you start to bring these panels up and move them around. You can see how that can begin to get kind of annoying when we have a lot of things open. So you can start grouping these panels, or you can put them in a nice, neat little line by contracting them, clicking on that little hatch line, and drag and place right here. As I hover over that line, it turns to a blue line that lets me know I can anchor it then in this place. I can also expand and contract once they're anchored in this line by clicking on the icon, or contracting it by clicking on the double arrows. I can contract it here to collapse the entire box. I can anchor it. See how I hover over there and it becomes the little blue line, lets me anchor it. And then I can expand or collapse that panel from this nice, neat little line that I have created. So I would encourage you to spend some time pulling up different panels, looking at them, even hovering over their icons to see what they do. At this point, we have tooltips turned on, which brings me to our preferences. Under Illustrator and Preferences, you can do a couple of different things. At this point, you're beginning Illustrator students, so you're not going to have a lot of preferences. You don't know what you need to know yet, and you haven't developed preferences necessarily. But look at a couple of things. Under Preferences and User Interface, I can actually change the color of my user interface from light, medium light. I think it defaults to medium dark. So you can see how under user interface, which is located in preferences, you can change the color of your workspace. Another thing that you can do is change the units of measure that you work in. For example, if you were working on a print project, you might use points or inches. If you were working on a web project, you'd be more likely to select pixels. This is one area where you can choose your preferences. You'll learn another way to change your units of measure in a later demonstration. Under General Preferences, there's a lot of different things that I'd like you to keep in their default settings to begin with. One thing that I personally prefer is when I'm scaling elements on the artboard, I actually prefer for Illustrator to scale my strokes and effects as well. Strokes refer to outlines that I have given objects on the stage. So under General Preferences, leave them the same, but you can choose to select Scale, Strokes, and Effects. And you can click on OK. So at this point, it's just to note where preferences are. As you gain preferences over time, you'll be able to update those preferences in Adobe Illustrator. So we've gone through our drop-down main menu. We've talked about the control panel here, or your tool options bar. We've introduced you to the toolbar. I've talked a little bit about this artboard, floating panels, how to access them, expand and contract from the icon and list, how to move them around, and what this little hatched line means in terms of actually anchoring this or moving these panels into a more organized space. And this concludes your introduction to the Adobe Illustrator Workspace.